German and Japanese recruitment challenges. Demographics is only part of the story. During World War II, Japan and Germany were the principal Axis powers. However, since the conclusion of the war, both countries have evolved into economic powerhouses and vital members of the Western Alliance in Europe and the Pacific. This month, both nations unveiled new objectives for their respective military buildups to address current security challenges in their regions. The planned buildups aim to establish the largest armed forces for both countries since World War II. Coincidentally, their primary adversaries today are not significantly different from those during the war, specifically China and Russia. Despite their ambitious goals, both Japan and Germany face challenges in meeting their defense manpower objectives. Both Japan and Germany currently maintain volunteer militaries, which necessitates the creation of conditions that encourage young people to enlist. A significant challenge both countries face, similar to many in the West, is their low birth rates and aging populations. Consequently, the pool of eligible individuals of military age is diminishing, compelling military recruiters to compete with private industry for this increasingly limited group of young people. Japan's birth rate stands at 1.2 births per woman, while Germany's is 1.4, both substantially below the population replacement rate of 2.1 births per woman. Additionally, both countries have relatively older populations, with Japan's average age at 49.9 years and Germany's at 47.8 years. In comparison, the United States has a median age of 38.7 years, although it also currently falls below the replacement rate, with 1.6 births per woman. The demographic challenges are not the only obstacles to meeting recruitment goals. However, they are a significant concern, as reflected in the recruitment statistics. The Japanese government has authorized its Self-Defense Force, SDF, to maintain a strength of 247,154 personnel, but has consistently fallen short of this target, currently lacking about 20,000 personnel. Similarly, Germany faces comparable issues. The German armed forces, known as the Bundeswehr, currently consist of 182,000 active-duty military personnel and 35,000 reservists, also experiencing a shortfall of 20,000 personnel. Both armed forces are experiencing a shortage of new recruits, which results in junior officers and non-commissioned officers taking on responsibilities typically assigned to new personnel. This situation hinders senior military members from developing their leadership skills. While education and classes can contribute to this development, they cannot replace the skills acquired and refined through real-world experience. Ultimately, this will affect how mid-level managers, using a term from the private sector as an analog, evolve into senior leaders within their respective militaries. This issue of stifling leadership development can lead to dissatisfaction among personnel, making it harder to convince them to remain in the military. This, in turn, reduces the numbers needed to establish a careerist base essential for an effective armed force. As a result, both Japan and Germany are struggling to retain their current personnel. Despite ongoing tensions in Europe and the Western Pacific, both countries have seen declines in their armed forces, even though they meet recruitment goals. Dissatisfaction among mid-level leaders facilitates the private sector's ability to attract military personnel, who are also seeking young workers. Japan and Germany's actions during World War II, along with their subsequent defeat and military occupation by Allied powers, resulted in the eradication of military and political elements within each society. This was followed by the establishment of new governing systems that eliminated militarism as a foundation of governance. Additionally, re-education programs were implemented to address the populations, particularly from the perspectives of Japan and West Germany, while East Germany experienced a different rehabilitation process under Soviet influence. The combination of acknowledging and accepting responsibility for wartime atrocities, along with the complete disbandment of military structures, fostered a societal rejection of military service. This rejection emerged in the context of defeat, the losses suffered during the war, and the admission of war guilt, all of which undermined the national pride necessary to support an armed force, particularly a volunteer professional military. The other factor that reshaped Japanese and German society was that neither country needed a military after the war, as the occupying Allied powers took full responsibility for the territorial integrity of both nations. This enabled the populations, along with young recruits eligible for military service, to focus on rebuilding and establishing a new governing system, rather than diverting resources to maintain a military. The American nuclear monopoly and later dominance after 1949 allowed these countries to be protected with minimal armed forces provided by the occupying powers, which eliminated any pressure from the Allies to reconstitute the German or Japanese armed forces. It was not until 1954 in Japan and 1955 in Germany that the Allies permitted the establishment of national armed forces, albeit under restrictive guidance. Neither country had full sovereign control over their armed forces. Germany experienced significant changes with the end of the Cold War and its reunification, which marked a period free from existential threats and highlighted the costs associated with reunification. This process was overseen by post-Cold War leaders who were not fully committed to national defense, particularly in the aftermath of the nuclear peace protests of the 1980s. They were willing to allocate the peace dividend and allow the military and defense industries to fade into the background of society, perceived as wasteful and relics of a bygone era that needed to be forgotten. The volunteer and professional military must operate within an economic system that features a functional labor market. This market provides a pool of eligible workers who have the freedom to choose where to dedicate their time. Consequently, military recruits have the opportunity to make an informed choice to join the military, weighing their decision against their opportunity cost. In contrast, the private sector tends to be more dynamic, adapting more swiftly to changing circumstances, and competing more effectively in the labor market. The other issue that challenges both Germany and Japan, particularly in the post-World War II and post-Cold War environment, is the societal factors that are less pronounced in these two countries compared to their peer nations that emerged victorious in World War II. The war crimes committed during the conflict and the subsequent assignment of blame to both Germany and Japan fostered a significant public reluctance to accept military service, as responsibility for the war of aggression was attributed to those who ordered and executed it. Given the extensive destruction and loss of life caused by the war, this response was not an unjustified policy or reaction. A volunteer force requires a sense of patriotism, which is often linked to nationalism. The Allied powers attributed public support for the war in both world wars to nationalism, and the blame assigned, along with the subsequent war guilt after World War II, influenced how both the Japanese and, to a greater extent, the Germans perceived their national identities. This development would significantly affect the understanding of patriotism and ultimately diminish it as a tradition in both countries. These are not all the reasons for the recruitment challenges in both countries, as internal regional differences within each country can also play a role. The demographic challenges in Germany and Japan have established a high barrier for a volunteer armed force. This obstacle must be addressed by societies that have developed a highly critical view of the armed forces, leading to a societal predisposition that is difficult to change, especially considering that the conditions fostering this viewpoint have persisted for over 80 years. The challenges facing both Japan and Germany as they seek to strengthen their armed services in response to perceived near-term threats from Russia and China may not allow for the luxury of waiting on new programs or initiatives to boost recruitment. Despite the ongoing war in Ukraine, Germany's armed forces have decreased in size, even as successive German governments express concern over the Russian threat. In light of this situation, Germany is now contemplating the reintroduction of some form of conscription to address the issue. Although the military draft policy is likely to be unpopular, it may be the only short and mid-term solution to South Korea's personnel issues. South Korea, facing an existential threat from North Korea and grappling with a severe demographic crisis, 0.78 births per woman, has implemented conscription since 1957. All able-bodied men between the ages of 18 and 28 are required to serve for 18 to 21 months. This system also creates a pool of military-trained individuals who could serve as a reserve force in times of crisis. The path forward for both countries regarding recruitment and retention of their careerists seems clear, provided that politicians are willing to make this unpopular decision.